Welcome to Wine for Normal People, the podcast for people who like wine, but not the snobbery that goes with it. I'm your host, Elizabeth Schneider, author of the Wine for Normal People book and certified wine dork. This podcast is sponsored by Wine Access. Go to wineaccess.com/normal to join my wine club. Get $25 off your first 2 orders. 4 shipments a year. I pick all the wines, do a letter and the videos. You got to check it out today. Also, you get 10% off every purchase you make on Wine Access as a wine club member. Go to wineaccess.com/normal. Listen in the middle of the show for more details. Here's something you probably didn't know. Vienna is the only major city in the world where serious wine grapes grow, and it has its own appellation in the green belt surrounding this very green city. Wine grapes grow as they have since at least the Middle Ages, and it's not negligible. There's 582 hectares or 1,438 acres. It's also not crappy tourist wine. It's high quality, interesting wine that's tasty and different. And it's such a part of the culture that in 2008, the famed blend that is so associated with this region, Gemischter Satz, was added to the list of Austrian products in the Slow Food Arc of Taste catalog. It's become such a priority for Vienna and Austria that the Viennese state law states that all existing vineyards must remain vineyards, protecting valuable land from real estate speculation. And standing side by side with the wine and with the blend is the unique tradition of the wine taverns here, the Heurige, which I'm sure I'm not saying right, but Alex will definitely set us straight here on all the pronunciations. These are such an important part of Austria's tradition that it is on the list of UNESCO intangible cultural heritage that was granted in 2019. So today, to talk about all this amazing tradition that I bet you had no idea even existed, I have Alex Zahel, 4th generation general manager and winemaker of Zahel. And we need to thank patron Stefan B for helping us make this connection and bringing us an awesome opportunity to learn about a historic region and its wines. Welcome, Alex. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thanks for having me.
Why don't you tell us about Vienna? Because I think this is going to be a big surprise to everybody. Can you talk about the history of winemaking and grape growing in Vienna?
Absolutely. So thanks for the nice intro. Vienna, as some of you might know, is the largest capital city of Austria. It's also the second largest city in terms of German-speaking population after Berlin. And we are also one of the smallest wine regions and the only capital city which is classified as a wine region, which makes our job very specially felt because we farm roughly 600 hectares within the city limit. And as some of you might know, the Celts as well as the Romans brought the first vines to Vienna. And since possibly then, we farmed this very traditional historic style called Gemischter Satz, this white field blend within the city limits.
Do we know were there other urban centers, like did Paris or Berlin or any of these other cities or even around Austria or Europe have vineyards in urban areas, or is this very, very unique to Austria?
I think in general, in terms of where climate-wise it was possible to grow vines, there were vines all over Europe in each major city because that's where people settled and kind of farmed mixed agriculture land and of course also vines to produce great wine to supply their local community. But I think it's basically started right after phylloxera to mainly focus in the main wine growing areas, to focus on different single variety wines. And I think that's also when Vienna became a wine region because in the past, the vineyards were basically outside of the city center. And only when the city expanded and kind of became bigger, most of those land was more integrated within the city center. And that's the main difference to other cities like Paris. Paris grew so much that there's no mixed agricultural land or farmland left where you could grow vines, but there's still some vineyards left in Paris. There is even some vineyards in Berlin, which also my uncle planted in the past, but still it's not recognized as their own wine region, Berlin or Paris. It's just outside of Paris.
Right. And Paris is pretty much all urbanized and built up. And, that's
absolutely,
it's a very,
yes.
very different situation. All right. Am I saying this wrong? Heurige?
Heurige.
Okay, so H. All right,
Heurige,
so we say,
yeah.
All right, so the tradition of Heurige taverns started as wine served in a vineyard, started in, at least by my research, 1784. Does that still exist? Can you talk about the whole tradition? Because it's a really interesting and very specialized tradition. I think that this also was very widespread in many other cities, but it is really, really unique to Austria now. So can you talk about the Heurige and what that is exactly?
Sure. So what happened, these Austrian bistros, as I would name them, called Heurige restaurants, have been around since centuries. And what basically happened in 1984 was the Emperor Joseph II allowed us, the farmers, to sell our product, our wines, our produce tax-free to customers. And that's when it was legally possible to grow this kind of business. And in the past, people brought their own food and we would serve our own wine. And it started out with little, almost like picnic areas in the vineyard. And then it started closer to the winery. And we started in 1930 with only 4 Heurigen tables. And yeah, it's just a fun place to hang out. And traditionally speaking, in those restaurants called Heurige, Heurige translates in German to this year's wine. So it's kind of the Austrian Nouveau style, which was always released at St. Martin's Day at 11th of November. And that's when the new vintage of this traditional Gemischter Satz field blend wine was served at this Heurige restaurant. And it was kind of a destination place where people would come, enjoy this new wine, talk about their day and get wasted. And we still do this at certain periods of the year. And that's how it was started and still is a very, very famous tradition. So every tourist, every local people loves to go to these Heurige restaurants.
There's 2 different things, though. Aren't there some that are just operational during the harvest where you can have like Buschenbank, is that what it's called, where you're inside of the vineyard and they're having the celebration, or that doesn't exist anymore?
Traditionally speaking, there was the Buschenschank, which was more like cold food, and more Buschenschanks were less varieties of food. So it was more like cold foods, like some spreads and breads and some local recipes. And I think the word Heurige is more like for the Viennese area. And since the 1960s, we also serve their warm food. So the Heurige nowadays, I would more say it's more commercial and more warm food, where we also allowed to serve this typical Austrian dish like the Wiener Schnitzel and all this kind of Schweinsbraten, so all these meat-driven dishes. And since then, I would say that on the countryside, there's still more the name Buschenschank famous, and in the city of Vienna, the traditional wine bistro is the Heurige.
So when you go to Austria, you should expect to go to the Heurige. You should not expect to go in the vineyard. That would be like in the sticks, basically, is what you're saying, in the middle of nowhere.
That's true, but there's some kind of Heurige restaurants where they also have a little bit small Buschenschank in the vineyard style, because
people
now want to go back to the vineyard and like it, because of course it's more beautiful with the nice view in the back. You can have a nice glass of Gemischter Satz and looking into the city of Vienna.
So cool. Your family, let's talk about the Zahel family. You have been making wine in Vienna for 4 generations. Can you talk about the wine history and how your relatives survived? Because these 4 generations had a lot going on. You had, as you mentioned, phylloxera, which affected Austrian vineyards terribly. The wars, Vienna was right in the center of that. Then there was the Austrian wine scandal in 1985, which actually wound up making Austrian wine so much better. But how did everybody survive this? I always like to ask this question because it really is pretty fascinating. I mean, we think about a lot of the audience is American or English or Australian. Many of our families were not around for all of that, right? We were already in the US or we were already in Australia. It is really fascinating to think about a family that had to survive through all of that.
Our family has been around since almost 500 years in the southern border of Vienna. And there were 3 branches of the family. One were kind of well makers. And then when the Emperor Joseph II and Franz Joseph supplied the city with fresh water from the Austrian Alps, which are just an hour and a half away, with one of the best fresh waters on earth to supply such a large city. When they supplied the city with water, then they went kind of out of business and then focused more on mixed agriculture. And we had animals on the farm. And then the other branch of the family were building wine barrels. So there are lots of Viennese oak trees, which are also grown on pure limestone, so grow very slow, and they are very fine oak trees. And through the different periods of the last 3 centuries, they switched within these three branches to make the living and survive. And then, of course, there was the Great Depression in the 1930s and 20s, when the first two generations, my great-grandmother and grandmother, kind of saved the land against the Russians and the Nazis and the Russians again. And it was really difficult to kind of defend the house and keep the land more or less together. And I mean, it was not easy, as you can imagine. And then their husbands were, of course, in the war, or when they're not, were helping them in the fields and on the farms, were kind of having a second job to contribute some money to the family income. And again, this was only possible because we were such a small farm with a few animals and half of a hectare. And then my uncle, the third generation, when my grandfather died in 93, really switched his racing career. He was a former car racer in Austria and Germany and changed the racing car against the tractor, and then grew the business and built the basis with the Heurige restaurant as well as more vineyards to kind of try to grow the business. Since then I am around, I grew it as well, and that's how we survived those difficult times. But I think in general we were quite small, and we did whatever was possible within such a small, strong family, supported by strong women from the beginning.
Well, that's very nice to hear that women played a big part. You know, you look at this and you just say, well, that's what we had to do. But it really is quite remarkable, because I am sure that there were also people who just said, I'm not doing this farming thing. I'm going to give it up and just work a job in an office or work in a factory. And your family did maintain the farm. So really that must be some sort of dedication or tie to the land that your family did not want to give up. And it couldn't have been easy, again, both defending the land against intruders and invaders, but also then trying to make a living off the farm so you would be able to continue it and maintain it. Without those people before, you and your uncle would not have been able to do what you do now, right?
No, and I think in retrospect, I mean, when now my grandmother is 92, she's still around, she's working every day as hard as possible, makes me feel very lazy every day I talk to her. But it was this kind of building something generation, you know, surviving through the wars and not leaving the land. You know, I mean, we also have Jewish roots in our family, and it was never easy, as you said, but still they built the basis for us that we have some land left, and so many people left because they needed to, otherwise they would have not made it. So it's really remarkable how strong these women, my ancestors, were in the past. And now can be very proud of that we still can build based on this tradition, the future for my children.
I think it's really amazing. It's good to hear that you have pride in it. Looking in from the outside, I can't imagine how much it must have taken, how much sacrifice. I think it's fantastic. Now, talk about your path, because you took over from your uncle. You're not an old guy. So you took over from your uncle Richard in 2005. You have grown the business and you have this vision for what you want to do. And yet, when we think about Austria, I really do think that the Austrian wine scandal, the antifreeze scandal, right? Which by the way, you know, Italy did the same thing and actually killed people, but Austria didn't. But as I say about Austria, it should be in every business school text, because what Austria did is the same thing that, I don't know if you're familiar with this, but Tylenol had a big scandal in the 1980s also, where they were finding poison, or I can't remember, it was razor blades or something inside of their bottles. And they pulled everything off the shelves. And they are often touted for being a company with massive integrity. They took a huge loss. Austria did the same thing. They decided to take somebody putting some diethylene glycol inside of the wine to bolster the mouthfeel, the texture, and revamp Austrian wine. And it has made Austrian wine way better, have more integrity, all of those things. So it actually, I look at it as a hugely positive thing that they came back from it. And Austrian wine has a lot of integrity. But the focus is the Danube regions. It is Wachau, it is Kremstal, it is Kamptal. And then you have now coming online Burgenland and all of the red wine regions. And you're sort of left, oh, well, that's really great that Wien has some wine. That's so novelty. People don't understand that it's actually high quality wine. How did you, or how are you overcoming that? And what did you see when you took over in 2005? What were you thinking? Like, were you thinking, I've got a mountain to climb? Or were you thinking, this is great local stuff? Or what were you thinking?
That's actually a good point to this question, because when my first vintage was 03, when I was still a teenager in wine and fruit growing school, and my uncle started when there were exactly of those famous regions like Premstal, Kamptal, Wachau Valley, lots of very famous, ambitious, revolutionary winemakers coming up, producing dry, crisp, elegant Austrian Grüner Veltliner and all of these great varieties. When my uncle started with Gemischter Satz, no one actually cared. No one was interested in this kind of niche Viennese wine, which was maybe local, famous in the 60s, but in better times. So he only had this half of a hectare of Gemischter Satz, and it was really frustrating for him to see going to wine first and realizing no one is interested in the Gemischter Satz. That's why for him it was also important to focus on this Wiener Gemischter Satz. And then when I started, it was also frustrating as a 60-year-old to see basically what my uncle is doing is not really showing up, because even in school they made fun of me. What do you want with this Gemischter Satz? And it's just kind of rubbish and a mixed thing in the cellar of old tanks, not being good high quality wine. So I was, of course, very focused and said, we can do better. And that's when actually by tasting the wine and doing the WSET diploma as one of the youngest in Austria, going around the angle, how can wine taste? And then develop these different aromas of these different characteristics of Gemischter Satz with different grape varieties. I became more interested as a winemaker and then a wine grower, and became slowly but surely growing into the family business by, of course, studying abroad in New Zealand and Australia, and I also studied ecology and economy at university. But really, it was these very early days of standing with my uncle together, all this wine first, realizing we can build something like my great-grandmothers and great-grandparents did in the past, and rebuilding this renaissance of Gemischter Satz. So the excitement of something new and rebuilding was stronger than the kind of frustration of not having all these super cool wines which were fancy from the Wachau Valley that days.
It sounds like it was a little insulting to you when you were in school, because yes, I mean, it was a lot about the shiny objects. And we do have to give credit to Wachau, because if not for them, Austria, I think, wouldn't be where it is today. So we definitely have to say that the Danube region led this. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that you can't make great wine just because it's different. And what's so interesting is the trend, because now field blends in general, are so much more acceptable than they were when you first started in 2005. 2005 is actually when I also entered the wine industry. And nobody really wanted to do blends, because people were thinking, like, unless it was Côte de Rhône or Bordeaux, it was, oh, what's in it? Ew. But I think things have completely changed, don't you?
Yes. And I think in those days when Grüner Veltliner or even Cabernet Sauvignon, Sauvignon Blanc, Chardonnay were famous, so all these single variety global trends pushing from all these new world markets into the old world. This not only happened in Austria, but also in parts of Germany and France. And I think that we not jumped on this train and really focused on our heritage of historic grape varieties and styles, were of course not a benefit at that early stages, but now and in the future will be, because I think what my grandparents built and my uncle succeeded by working very hard is now the basis for me to really show up and promoting Gemischter Satz not only as an easy drinking estate village wine style, but also in the kind of old wine, single variety, true style. And that's really makes me happy now.
Yeah, well, let's talk about the terroir, because I think this is something people don't really think about. Again, when we think about Vienna or Wien, we think about the absolutely gorgeous city, and we think about all of the culture, and we think about all of that, right? You know, like many of us have traveled. I've been to Vienna. It's beautiful, but you don't think immediately about wine and terroir. So let's talk about that. Can you talk about the climate? And it is actually on the Danube, even though it's not considered a Danube region. What's the difference? And also, you were talking about your family being from the south. There is a north-south difference, isn't? It's not all homogenous either.
No, not at all. I mean, I would still almost say that Vienna is in the center of all the wine regions. So, of course, we are right in the middle between the more western-facing wine regions along the Danube River and then more the eastern, warmer climate, the Burgenland area. I sometimes try to explain, when I talk about Austrian wine, we have the fourth largest river of Europe, the Danube River, and it's like along the Rhone or the Loire Valley. We have different areas which are connected to this Danube River when it runs through Austria. And I think more cooler is Wachau Valley, Kamptal, and Kremstal, obviously, but Vienna is really in the center, and we are still influenced climate-wise by this Danube River, at least in those vineyards close to the Danube River. So in general, we have a continental climate, which is depending on the year, and winds influenced by some Pannonian winds coming from the Hungarian border and more southern area. But that means we have very hot summers, but also cold winters. But still, the Viennese forest is kind of cooling the city and cooling the single vineyards, which are running along those hills, falling into the city from the Viennese forest. And we have more or less 5 different local areas under vines within Vienna, which we, in 3 of those areas, have vineyards. The winery is located in the southwest on an altitude of around 400 meters above sea level.
Wow.
And even within those 3 areas, we have 3 different types of soil. So, of course, we have this fossil limestone on the Nussberg Hill, very close to the Danube River. This is a beautiful hill, which when you stand on the top, you have a beautiful view to the Danube River and the city on a sunny day. I mean, it's just gorgeous. It's like standing at Hermitage or being the first time in the Mosel River. It's just one of those beautiful moments you have. And those soils, they're based, as I said, on fossil limestone, and the topsoil is more like sandy, clay-ish soils. And then in the southeast area, it's a very small vine area called Oberla. And in this area on the Goldberg, we have gravel. So lots of gallet stones, all these pebbles, which you also find in Chicadas, with lots of iron in the ground. So in the ground is limestone free. And then in the southwest, very close to the Viennese forest, you have more this dolomite limestone, which you also find in Alto Adige, with schist on top and also some sandstone. So it's really diverse, and we're lucky to farm vineyards on 95 different plots. And depending on the style of vine, like estate, village, or single vineyard, we can really blend some of those different areas together and create this beautiful Wiener Gemischter Satz.
Can you talk about the different classifications? This is something that's really important in both German and Austrian wine. I think this is, at least in the last maybe 10 years, it's really taken hold. And it is after the Burgundian model, but I think a lot of people don't know that the monks were also prominent in Austria and Germany. So the idea of village wine and single vineyard, Premier Cru basically, and Grand Cru, that's not just for Burgundy. It actually is pretty prominent in German and Austrian wine. So can you just talk about those 3 and what that means, the Gebietswein? And
Absolutely. So I would even, as a bigger intro, start that before the wine scandal, we still had this more Burgundy regional styles of wine for each region, and probably not each single vineyard, but still we had lots of monasteries focused in several wine regions on specific hills and single vineyards, like in Burgundy as well. And then after the wine scandal, as we already talked, we more focused on broader grape variety focused wines. And now it's really interesting, I would say almost 10, 15 years ago, in some areas, maybe 20 years ago, a small group of winemakers trying to rebuild this heritage of single vineyard winemaking. So what that means for Vienna at our winery, I would say, means that we produce a called regional Wiener Gemischter Satz, which is more like our village wine, which we can blend from all the different plots we farm within Vienna to one wine. It would be similar to the kind of Vin de Bourgogne in Burgundy, a Chardonnay from all the different appellations within Burgundy.
The regional
wine. We do the same thing. The regional wine, exactly. And then we have the possibility of each village within Vienna to use specific single vineyards within the village to call it as a village wine, like Nussberg or Mauer or Oberla. On top of this, we have the so-called single cru classification, which we can, when there is the Austrian word Ried in front of a name of a vineyard, that means it's from a very small single cru within Vienna. And usually in our winery, it's from older vines. The yields are lower. It's usually also longer on the lease. But in general, this classification is now more present also on the labels, even though it's not 100% integrated in Austrian wine law yet. There's a discussion on if we should do that, if we should focus on the Burgundy model. Because again, in Burgundy, as we all know, monks decided in the 1930s and they pushed it through a classification, and the Grand Crus will never change in Burgundy. And that's why Austria, and at least in my opinion, as a humble winemaker doing this for 20 years now, I think for me in personal, I am too young to know now yet which vineyards are Grand Cru in Vienna.
Right.
I'm honest about that.
Yep.
Maybe in 10 years, I know better, but right now I can say I only did 20 years and every year is different. So it will need some time to really focus on that. But we still use this village, Premier Cru and Grand Cru, ideal for our single vineyards and wines in Vienna.
I mean, the way I think about it is that the classification system is actually very helpful because it allows, as a consumer, for us to know what the better wines are. The problem is they're not flexible. So there are some really great wines that get overlooked because you can't move in and out of classifications. It's the same with the Bordeaux 1855 classification. There's plenty of wines on there that should not be on there. And there's plenty of wines that are not on there that should be on there. But because it was set so long ago, we don't have that opportunity. Now, Burgundy pretty much got it right. Let's face it. Those 33 Grand Cru are really the best that you're going to get. But there are Premier Cru that are almost as good. I guess the whole thing about it is if Austria does do it, there's got to be some flexibility or relooking at the classification so that if now 20 years in you say this should be a Ried and you decide that in 10 years it's actually not that anymore because of climate change or whatever, but you got another one, it should be able to be reclassified because we can't be that rigid anymore because things are changing with the climate.
That's very true. And on top of that, Elizabeth, I would say using again, forgive me if I use Burgundy again, but you mentioned this at the beginning, a great producer can produce, even in a not as good year, a village entry-level wine, a great wine. That's my experience after being 20 years in the industry. So for me, I would almost say the producer is the most important, and then maybe the terroir, and then the vintage, in my personal opinion. And I think that should also show to play if we really want to do this classification, we need to be aware of that as well. And the climate is changing. Now it's becoming warmer, but the newest scientists say if the Gulf Stream will feed away, then actually north of the Alps will become much more wet, much colder,
freezing,
kind of pre-industrialization, freezing cold, and Spain and Italy will become a desert. So, and that can happen within the next 40, 50 years. So in terms of that, we also should be aware if we should now want to classify south-facing single vineyards.
Yeah, and also, I mean, again, now north-facing is acceptable, whereas when you started, it probably wasn't. North-facing slopes were taboo. I hope you're loving the show. I love to hear about these really traditional regions that maybe we know less about. And Alex is such a great spokesperson for the wines of Vienna. And I hope all of you who are going to travel to Vienna will go to Zahel and see Alex and go see the winery. It is really quite amazing that they are keeping this tradition alive and it is thriving. Let's take a step away. And first, I'm going to say that if you want to join an amazing community of wine lovers who have fun and great discussions, hangouts, and all the rest, go to Patreon and join the Wine for Normal People community for as little as $22 a year. You can find it at patreon.com/winefornormalpeople. Check it out today. It is really awesome. Also, you get access to the entire back catalog if you join the membership community. That's a perk of Patreon. Also, Wine for Normal People classes, winefornormalpeople.com/classes is how you will find those if you are interested in spending a fun Saturday evening dorking out about wine with, again, a fantastic community of people and me live. Do it today, winefornormalpeople.com/classes. We've lots of great classes scheduled now and always. And then, of course, we need to thank our sponsor, Wine Access. Go to wineaccess.com/normal and join the wine club. Just check it out. If you look at the wine club page, you will see you get so many perks. 10% off anything you order from the Wine Access site once you join the wine club. Plus, you get 4 shipments a year. Wineaccess.com/normal. For a special limited time, we are giving you $25 off your first 2 shipments if you join the wine club now. That is $125 for 6 bottles. These wines are all hand selected by me, and they are all things that I stand by and they all are around a theme. Each quarter is so much fun, and everything Wine Access has on the site is of such high quality. They have a team of experts who tries so many wines every year, and they really only pick the best of the best. They do it by committee. The wines are usually from small producers where you might have a hard time getting access to them. That's why it's called Wine Access. They are giving you access to the world of wines. The prices are competitive. Customer service is awesome. If you don't like a bottle, you just call them. They will give you a credit for that bottle. When you get that box from Wine Access, you're going to get wine notes. You're going to get serving temperatures, pairing suggestions, information about the winery. It is such a great education resource. Sign up today. That's wineaccess.com/normal. And who knows, maybe at some point we'll even get wines from Vienna on there. And now let's get back to Alex and this really cool podcast. Can we just talk about the vine age? I've been in this a long time. I don't even know that I was familiar that a fresh white wine could have old vines. Like, unless you're looking for a lot of concentration, aren't you usually pulling out those vines when they get older? Can you explain why old vines are a benefit for fresh white wines, or is this only for the more sophisticated wines?
I'm a big believer and lover of old wines. I also studied economy, therefore I should say no, because in terms of yielding and profitability, sometimes it's the opposite.
Right.
But I do think that old wines, because their roots are deeper into the soil, actually have a cooling effect for the vines itself. Young wines are more on the topsoil, therefore they just produce sugar and are early ripening. And in terms of now global warming and climate changing, the key word for old wines is the balance, whether it's more concentrated or more full body in terms of high alcohol. And that's what I'm looking for with old wines. So for me, it's more of the balance of old wines, which I really love. And because as a field plant, we have different grapes variety all grown together, there is not one significant character of each grape variety. So it's more like the balance of those grape varieties playing together, with old wines playing together in terms of getting the sense of the terroir and the kind of sense of place. And then, of course, me as the winemaker, navigating those influences. That's the more interesting part with old wines. And I do think we should focus on older wines as well, because, again, some of the vineyards my grandmother and my great-grandmother planted, and they knew what was best in those days. And I think that's also interesting in terms of concentration from the soil, now that the rootstock is deeper in the soil.
It's probably important to have some, especially in the blend, to have some young and old so that you can get the acidity, though, because isn't the acidity a little bit lower on these older vines because there's so much fruit, or no?
It really depends on the plot. In general, in a warmer year, I would say yes. Interestingly, in cooler years, like, for example, in 20 or even 16 or even 23 was quite cool harvest time. We experienced that those old wines on these plots have sometimes even higher acidity than the young wines, which produce lots of fresh aroma and fresh fruit. And I think this is basically to do with our limestone soils. And when the rootstock is deeper in the soil, lower pH, therefore higher acidity, I think those soils retain better the acidity, even the vines are older. And I think that's the secret behind that, in my personal opinion.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So let's talk about biodynamics. I just did a show on recapping what biodynamics was. I did a lot of research on Rudolf Steiner, the originator of the theory of biodynamics, and he was an Austrian. What made you want to do biodynamic rather than organic? I mean, your family has not used a lot of pesticides or herbicides over the years, so it seems like you've already maintained soil health. Why biodynamics?
I think in general, I need to go back what my grandmother did again. They planted vines on agricultural land or land where orchard trees grew. So they also never sprayed any herbicides. So they never actually did something bad to the topsoil. And that gave us the basis to go into organics. And the reason why I did the first experiments with organic farming in 2005. And then I really realized that it's definitely the right path we should go. But then I was tasting lots of wines of different wine regions. And usually the best wines, in my personal opinion, were biodynamic certified wines. So I traveled to these wine regions. I talked to the winemakers. I let them convince me why I should do that. And again, it was balance of the vines, strengthening the vines in the vineyards, healthier looking vineyards. Not so much about the esoteric stuff. I mean, I read lots of books of Rudolf Steiner, but it's hard for me to get the convincing part of the books when not practicing it out in the vineyards. So for me, the convincing point was really finding friends and other winemakers within Austria doing biodynamics, following the Demeter guidelines, which is the strictest, most global club and oldest certified biodynamic club in the world. And there, by doing these preparations, working together, listening, communicating, that gave me always a strong feeling and believing that's what I should do. And after doing this now for almost 10 years and 6 years certified, I really can not maybe scientifically prove that there is some change happening, but I can see the vines look healthier, they're less vigorous, they ripe slower and later in terms of ripening. So by doing that, I could have also stretch the growing season and extending the growing season, which helps now with global warming a little bit. But it seems like the vine is in a better balance overall. And I think you should never do biodynamics just because it's a trend now. It's similar with organic. I think you really should pick whatever fits best for you as a farmer and what's best for your soil and also for your team, maybe. I mean, that's also why we probably now moved into regenerative farming, because we not only understood it's important to focus on the soil health, but also to work as a team together. And therefore, in our size of a winery, we're not as small anymore. So we need very, very good people. And we also need to care about them.
Let's talk about the wine, because Vienna is so different from other parts of Austria. So tell us about Gemischter Satz. What is it? Why is it traditional in Vienna? And let's be clear, Richard, your uncle, in 1989 was the first Viennese winemaker to write Wiener Gemischter Satz on the wine label. So just explain to us what it is. We've been talking about it, but let's give the definition and talk about what it is. And also, can you talk about how it's grown? Because field blend is a mushy topic, and some people say field blend and they take things from different parts of the vineyard and throw them in together. So talk about it.
It's true. It's a big topic, gladly. I start with the German word again. We need to translate what it means. And Gemischter means mixed, and Satz is set. So it's the mixed set or the mixed vineyard. And this historic tradition of planting different varieties within one field randomly, without any system. They grow together, vine by vine, not row by row or block by block, literally vine by vine. And they, by law, need to be harvested on one day altogether. So it's a co-farming, co-plantation, and then they grow together, pick together, ferment together. And this is the resulting true original Wiener Gemischter Satz, which my uncle had only vineyards available of this technique. And that's why he said, we can't name it Grüner Veltliner or a different other name for a different blend. We need to call it what it is. So he created one of the first DAC by not knowing that that's what he's doing. He was just naming Vienna as the regional Wien and Gemischter Satz, that's a grape variety. And by doing that, I think he was being honest of what our heritage was and is. And by doing that, many other people also realized that's what we should focus on in Vienna. So there were even other wineries which were much bigger already and doing a great job promoting wines from Vienna, even in an organic way, and then also biodynamic. But I think by grouping together with my uncle Richard and promoting this Wiener Gemischter Satz, it put Vienna back on a wine region. And even for the local in Vienna, most restaurant owners realized, wow, that's actually something local, it's historic, with good quality, and that's what we should focus on. Vienna now itself has almost, I think, more than a third of its vineyards under this Gemischter Satz planting technique, and it's very strictly protected by the Viennese wine law.
What is in it? We're talking about the field blends. What are the main grapes that most people grow? Is it Gruner or is it other things? I know you grow some really cool native grapes that I know I've read about them, but never tried them. Like, I don't know what Rotgipfel tastes like, So what do you grow? Can you explain just so people know what to expect?
In general, I think each family, and that's the magic of the Gemischter Satz, because it's not regulated by law which grape varieties you plant. So you can literally decide, knowing your land best, which grapes you want to throw in. But traditionally speaking, it was only a white wine, Gemischter Satz. So there was no red or rosé, even though some niche producers, young colleagues of mine, tried to do like rosé Gemischter Satz and a red, which is fun. And of course, kind of shows that we should do that. But traditionally speaking, it was only white Gemischter Satz. And I would group the grape varieties together by saying, of course, the strongest was always Grüner Veltliner and Riesling. So the traditional Austrian grape varieties. The next block of grape varieties I would name by Burgundy grapes like Pinot Blanc, even Chardonnay from the 70s and 80s. Then there was this phase of more aromatic grape varieties like Sauvignon Blanc, Muscat, and some others. Müller-Thurgau even was part of the 60-70 Gemischter Satz blends. And then the last group is really niche. There are these local Austrian grape varieties where we only have 2 hectares left and are the last producer on earth. So there's Orange Traube. This is the great, crazy grape variety we still farm. Then there's Rotgipfel and Zierpfadler. Those grape varieties are each only 120 hectares left in the southern area of Vienna. Very late ripening, very good retaining acidity. Therefore, I think that's why we're also used to kind of add freshness. For mint, interestingly, was always also a historic grape variety in the kind of southern Viennese area, also going back now to Burgenland and of course Hungary. And also then Gewürztraminer as one of these parent grape varieties in terms of very old grape variety was also always hidden treasure in our field blends. My grandmother always loved a little bit of Gewürztraminer to plant also, just to throw a few vines, but always less than 5%.
Well, a little goes a long way with Gewürz, let's face it. But
yes,
that's interesting about Formant because I would think, I guess it makes a lot of sense. You're right next to Hungary and that's their big white grape. So Gemischter Satz is not red. It's only white. The DAC is only white and the rosés you can't do either. So that's, when we're talking about the blend, we're talking about white.
100% correct. Okay. A DAC Wiener Gemischter Satz needs to be 100% from white grape varieties growing together. You are not allowed to grow even some other reds or reddish grape varieties.
Here's the question. You have everything that's grown together, it's harvested together, it's fermented together. But then the DAC regulations are a little kooky because they're saying like one grape variety can't be more than 50%, and then like the third lowest one can't be more than 10%. I mean, how do you control for that? It seems that what you have planted is what you have planted. So those rules seem, given what you said about how everything is kind of planted together, how did they come up with that? That seems like a weird rule.
Well, sometimes rules are made from people which are actually not farming the vineyard. So rules are made by politicians, and there is bureaucracy in every country in the world.
Yes.
And that's my diplomatic answer to that. Those rules were made in a time where we really wanted to show off, to have this new DAC classification of our appellation in Vienna. And I think if we would have waited another year, we maybe phrased those rules a little bit differently. But as you know, now the rules are the rules they are, and I think it's good. And I'm also usually a big fan of talking more about the terroir and the winemaking and the region and less about those rules, because some people break the rules anyway and produce a rosé and red Gemischter Satz anyway.
Well, I mean, it's just kind of dumb to be like, okay, you have a field blend, but one of them has to be 50% because we wanted to have a Riesling character or a Gruner character. That doesn't, I don't know. So why did it take until 2013 to get the DAC for Gemischter Satz? And given how small the region is, how are you able to market it outside? Because now you are marketing it and selling it outside of Vienna.
I think it was this phase of when Austrian wine and Austrian wine marketing and all these local regional boards came together and said, hey, we need to have a generic style for each wine region, which we can promote internationally speaking. And that's when I think they thought, hey, in 13, it's Vienna. We need this DAC. Let's make it happen that time.
Got it.
Forgive me if you hear the sound in the background. My uncle just passed with the tractor.
Well, what about that marketing, though? We see who led Vienna and who still really holds the power in Vienna in terms of marketing. And it really is the Wachau Valley. That's who holds the cards. How are you able to get in and market? And is there enough wine to get it out into markets? Because it's not a very big region. You don't make that much wine.
Yes, this is always the interesting thing when people ask me, oh, you're a winemaker within Vienna. You must be always sold out because everyone wants your wine. And I always answer the question saying, yes, but there are also 60,000 other competitor winemakers within Austria wanted to sell to Vienna as well, to all of these restaurants.
Yes.
So yes, there is definitely enough wine. Vienna has almost 150 recognized other winemakers to promote all this kind of traditional farming here in Vienna. And we decided almost 15 years ago to really focus on exports, because there I feel with our story, wine from Vienna, capital city, this niche of Gemischter Satz, very fruit-friendly kind of style, crisp, elegant, easy drinking, is our opportunity to kind of sell wine more globally and to more prestigious restaurants and retailers around the world. And that was our goal in terms of marketing, to market wine from Vienna. But there are still lots of other local producers which their wines never leave the city or Austria.
Right.
So everyone has its marketplace, and I would say there are a handful of winemakers which sell outside of the city of Vienna, and those promote more on an international basis, this Gemischter Satz style. But the Viennese people love to drink the Gemischter Satz at the local Heurige restaurant.
Yes, right.
So it's coming back. That's where most of Viennese wine is consumed, and that's good. And I would also make the point that most of the Wachau Valley wine is consumed within those local Buschenschank, Heurigens within the Wachau Valley by tourists, by local people. And they were just the first wine region which really also put Austrian wine on an international stage. And that's why the Wachau Valley is still so famous. But I also want to throw in that the Wachau Valley is only twice as big in terms of area than Vienna.
It's tiny. But it is, I think it's super important for at least a handful of producers to be introducing this wine outside of Vienna, because Vienna is a major destination. People come there to visit the city, and to be able to share a bit of the culture and show people that there's something beyond. People have their stereotypes about Vienna. They know it's a gorgeous city. They know the art scene is unbelievable. The music scene is unbelievable. I mean, that's why people go to Vienna, because of all of the culture. But then to add that, you know what, there's also a local wine, I think it gets people thinking. I think it's a great thing that you are out there and that your wine is distributed not just locally. Good on you.
Yes. And also the Viennese Tourist Board during COVID realized that we need to rethink tourism within Vienna. And they also started to kind of do wine hikes and focus now more on the suburb districts, because Vienna has 23 districts, to really show exactly what you just say, to show to people that we have this old tradition of producing wine within the city limits and then consume it locally with local recipes and local food at this Heurige restaurant. I mean, it's one of the greatest marketing stories, food and wine within Vienna.
No, it's fantastic. I mean, it's absolutely fantastic. I'm glad that they got on board with it. Let's talk about your winemaking. You are into long skin contact. You use naturally occurring yeast. Obviously, you're biodynamic. When you say you do long skin contact, are you looking to get more flavor? Are you looking to do like orange wine? What's your goal in your winemaking?
Well, some people probably would make fun of me if I say long skin contact from the more natural orange segment within Austria. I'm a big fan of some sort of skin contact because, as you said, I think it adds some layer of texture to the wine. It makes them more interesting, obviously depending on the year and on the pH level. So in warmer years, we try to, even not only with the Gemischter Satz, but also we have a kind of small portion of red grapes we farm. And there we love to have whole cluster, long skin contact, just to add some sort of more interesting flavors and lower the alcohol. But in general, when we talk about skin contact for the whites and our single vineyards, old wines, we usually keep them 36 hours to maximum of 6 days on the skins. And then we never skin ferment. So we don't produce orange wines at all. I do love to have a good glass of orange wine with a certain kind of dish, but I don't really like bitterness in the way in white wine. I love tannins for the reds, but I love freshness and balance and elegance in white wines. That's why for me, it's interesting to kind of escape sometimes and try something new when it comes to orange wine, but we don't produce orange wine of Gemischter Satz. We never will be. I think the traditional style more or less is not skin fermented Gemischter Satz, and therefore in an even warm year when the pH is higher, 4 to 6 days is the maximum. And then we also don't use those skins and press them very hard. We press them very gently so that we only use a little bit of bark to get the free run juice out of and keep the orange part in the press.
Well, some people would consider 6 days of skin contact to be orange wine, but we won't get into that. I think the secret that the orange wine producers do not want people to know is that most white wine is sitting on the skins for a while, because otherwise you're not going to get a whole lot of flavor out of it. The orange wine producers are like, no, they take everything off the skins immediately. That's not necessarily true. Look at Alsace. Alsace does a lot of skin contact to get more texture, to get more flavor. And I think it's always funny, the warring camps, like, we're natural wine and we do it this way, and conventional wine doesn't do it that way, and orange wine does it this way. And it's like almost every really good producer of white wine leaves the wine on the skin for some amount of time to get another amount of flavor, right? I mean, don't you feel like that's kind of like the secret?
Yes, absolutely. And I sometimes, during my education of becoming a winemaker, ask myself, why does champagne need to be so long on the lees?
Right.
Just because they need some flavor.
Right.
Because you don't get any texture from the grapes. I mean, you get a sort of kind of sense of place from the limestone soils. And that's really interesting when you taste base wines in champagne. But at the end, there's not much flavor there, as you just said.
No, and it's the same thing with white wine. Some of the juices are very aromatic, but if you want to get a little bit more and make a little bit better wine, you're going to have to leave it on the skins for some time. And I think that's the very interesting thing. I'm pretty sure Gruner is left on the skins. When you make your Gruner, do you leave it on or no?
Oh, for us, for sure.
But what about like the other producers? I think it's a secret that people don't say.
Interestingly, in most of those kind of more cooler climate wine regions, they do whole bunch pressing, which they don't leave it on the skin. So I sometimes would assume that whole bunch pressing would be more kind of interesting in warmer climates to add some freshness.
Yeah.
But interestingly, most of my colleagues in the Wachau Valley, Kamtal, they do whole bunch pressing.
Huh. It must just be that the site is giving enough flavor to the grapes so that they can do that, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it must be there's enough texture from the soil and or long lees and barrel aging in neutral oaks, Austrian oak later on.
Right. But let's be clear. White wine needs something most of the time, especially like something like Chardonnay.
Yes.
You got to do something to it or else it's just going to be nothing. Even in Chablis, like there has to be something.
But that's the beauty of being a winemaker. Every year is different. And you have so many, I mean, we have 95 different plots. We have so many old wines, young wines. We have Austrian barrel. We have Italian handmade amphoras. We have such a nice playground to really use the best grapes and play around and produce the most interesting wine we think in this year from this sense of place will be. And that's why I love my job still so much, because it's not every year the same.
Well, and you have the benefit of being able to blend, which has got to be much more exciting. It's a totally different discipline. Let's just say that. It's a very different discipline to make blends versus making a straight varietal. You do both, so you have the opportunity to do both things. But what varietal wines do you make?
As a single variety wine, we do have obviously Grüner Veltliner. We do have Riesling. We do have some aromatic grape varieties, a little bit of Muscat and Sauvignon Blanc. We do have this famous Orange Trauma, where we're the last recognized producer. And then in reds, we have a little bit of Blaufränkisch and St. Laurent, and even a tiny, tiny bit of Pinot Noir.
Wow. That makes sense, though, because you're in the southern portion, so you're getting some of that warmer influence, right? So what do you see as you are looking at the future for Zahel? What is the future for you? What would you like to see happen, both for your winery and for both Gemischter Satz and for Vienna in general? If you look out into the future, what would you like? My
vision always was to promote more Austrian wine in general. And therefore now, because we farm vineyards within Vienna, more Viennese wines, I think it doesn't really matter if it's a Gemischter Satz from us or from another colleague. In general, I would love to see more, at least organic and maybe biodynamic, and in the future, hopefully regenerative farming within Vienna as well. And I think we started this movement, we will grow it, and I think there is a huge potential in that area. I also think we should work closer together, taste more together in our cellars to create a more signature style for our wine region Vienna. So I think by doing that, we can bring innovation to the Gemischter Satz for the future and where it should be within the hierarchy of regional, village, premier, and Grand Cru wines. And I also would love to, I traveled quite a bit in 19. Then, of course, we had lovely time during COVID where we were back in the vineyards with our family on our knees, digging our hands into the ground. And now I feel like last year and this year was the first year, like similar to 19, where I realized we travel a lot, we promote a lot our styles, of course, because we also export to almost 25 different export markets. But if I in the future could spend more time being back in Vienna, educating not only Viennese, but international people, bring them back to our vineyards and explaining them what we're doing here, that would be a big passion of mine, to tell our story in Vienna, not just outside, which I've done the last 20 years. I traveled, we still went from Tokyo to San Francisco, and it's always lovely to be back in the US and back in Japan. It's such a great tradition. And again, Vienna produces such food-friendly wine that it doesn't really matter where you sell our wine.
Right.
But to really spend more time in Vienna, tell our story, that would be a huge...
Well, your kids are going to have to grow up so you can send them on the road, and then you can stay and
Exactly.
hang out. So, what do you have, like 25 years before that happens? You have little kids.
Well, when I look at my daughter, she's now 7. She's pretty grown up now. So maybe in 5-6 years, she can already be with me in the vineyards from time to time. And when I think she's early. So as a teenager, I can send her with some other friends of mine to our distributors around the world.
There you go. There's the future right there. Well, thank you so much for educating us on these great wines. It is such a really long, deep, and historic tradition that most of us were, I think, before the show, unaware of. I think when people travel to Vienna, you really do need to seek out both the Heurige and the wines that are available there for both the cultural traditions and also because these are good wine. They're not like crappy tourist wine, as I said at the beginning. This is really, really high quality wine. And with people like Alex who are trying to bring awareness, but also making the best possible wine that they can out of old vines and lots of tradition, you're doing it. So it's really exciting. And you are distributed in the UK, in the US, and you're in Japan. And are you in Australia also?
Not yet in Australia, but we're working on that.
Okay, Canada?
Canada, yes.
Okay.
SAQ, so Ontario region and Quebec as well, yeah.
Okay, so please look out for the Zahel wines. They are available. And Alex, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. And I can only add, don't be afraid of all these Austrian German names. Try to be experimental and try all these Austrian and Viennese wines and have fun with them.
Thank you so much. And with that, this has been another episode of Wine for Normal People. Thank you so much for listening, and we will catch you next time.